So, if the Romans had hanged Jesus instead of crucifying him, would autoerotic asphyxiation be a sacrament?
Jesus is here! The loudspeaker spoke up and said, Christianity is stupid.
This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker, and this is the Goddammit, I'm Still Sick episode. I went to the doctor on Monday, and they looked me over and said, well, we think it's viral, so there's really not a hell of a lot we can do for you. Here's a prescription for some antibiotics, and if it doesn't clear up in about a week or so, start taking them. And what with drug-resistant bacteria being a real problem in this area, I'm just going to hang on to that prescription and not take it, unless I'm absolutely certain that this is bacterial, because there's not really any point in me taking them otherwise. Allow me to apologize in advance for some of the weird audio characteristics you're going to hear after a while. My voice can only take me talking for so long before it starts to crap out, and I'm going to have to record this podcast in segments and then edit it all together at the end. So because of that, there's going to be some weird audio glitches that crop up from time to time, and there's unfortunately nothing I can do about it, since I have no idea when I'm going to actually be well again. Still, the show must go on and all that rot. And I am actually going to attempt to do a full episode with news and everything, and not just simply read again from Bible myths, since unless you've been living under a rock, you know that this has been one hell of a week for news. The Supreme Court issued its ruling in the Hobby Lobby case about covering contraception, and it has been nothing but a shitstorm ever since. And I'm not going to rehash that aspect of it, but I am going to read a couple of stories which I've not heard brought up anywhere else that show some of the darker sides as predicted by Justice Ginsburg's dissent. This one comes from Cleveland.com. Dateline, Washington, D.C. The U.S. Supreme Court followed up on Monday's controversial Hobby Lobby decision by ordering lower courts to reconsider other cases of companies with religious objections to providing birth control coverage in their workers' insurance, including one brought by a Dayton area produce purveyor. An appeals court ruled the Roman Catholic owners of Freshway Foods and Freshway Logistics of Sydney, Ohio, had the right to object to the contraceptive coverage for their 400 employees without addressing whether their corporation had that right. The attorney for the firm, Frank Mannion of the American Center for Law and Justice, said he expects the appeals court will retool its ruling after the Hobby Lobby case to decree that both his clients as individuals and the companies could object to providing any form of birth control to workers under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Quote, it is a relief that after litigating these cases for 2 years and responding to lots and lots of arguments from the government that, in our opinion, did not have merit, the Supreme Court has agreed with us, unquote, said Mannion. So it's not just the four kinds of birth control that everybody's saying that potentially could be affected by this Hobby Lobby ruling. It's all of them. And it's just crazy. And additionally, anti-gay activists are looking to use this in order to discriminate against gays. This comes from Right Wing Watch. Anti-gay activists hopeful Hobby Lobby will lead to license to discriminate. Anti-gay activists are rejoicing at the Supreme Court's decision in Hobby Lobby today, in part because they are hopeful that the decision will pave the way for one of their own policy goals, to use the religious liberty argument to push for broad exemptions for corporations from non-discrimination laws. Liberty Counsel's Matt Barber is hopeful that the decision bodes well for those trying to use religious freedom as a cloak to justify against discrimination against LGBT people. And he's put out a couple of lovely tweets to support his view. Hobby Lobby may help protect businesses from those pushing counter-biblical LGBT lifestyle and anti-Christian agenda. That's the first Matt Barber tweet they quote. The second is, Hobby Lobby bodes fairly well for freedom of association in context of LGBT immorality and religious freedom. Peter I have no idea how to pronounce that. Peter LaBarbera of Americans for Truth About Homosexuality has a similar take in his tweet. He says, LGBT left has been winning in the courts, but now we have hope that SCOTUS will honor small biz conscience exemptions on homosexuality. There may be reason for them to be optimistic. As SCOTUS blog pointed out, the majority's opinion pointedly leaves open the question of whether the government has a similarly compelling interest in preventing discrimination on the basis of sex or sexual orientation. Quote, with respect to implications for other kinds of religious-based discrimination, the court writes that racial discrimination in hiring will not be permitted under RFRA because, quote, the government has a compelling interest in providing equal opportunity to participate in the workforce without regard to race, and prohibitions on racial discrimination are precisely tailored to achieve that goal, unquote. Note that this leaves open the question of whether the government has a similarly compelling interest in preventing discrimination on the basis of sex or sexual orientation. Close quote. Okay, I'm going to stop here for a bit. As you might be able to tell, my voice is starting to go again. And the herbal tea I'm drinking, not because it's medicinal, but simply because the warm liquid makes my throat feel better, doesn't seem to be helping anymore. So I'll pick it up with some more news after I let my throat rest. So see you then. Okay, I'm back. I have switched from herbal tea to chicken bouillon. That seems to be doing a better job, although all the salt in the chicken bouillon is probably not that good for my blood pressure. Still, it does keep me from coughing, which is good because that's exceedingly painful right now. Anyways, where was I? Yeah. Okay, back to one more story about the Hobby Lobby case, and then I'll get to some things a little more interesting. This one comes from Al Jazeera America, and title of it is Gitmo Detainees, Lawyers Invoke Hobby Lobby Decision in Court Filing. There's no dateline given for this. Lawyers for two Guantanamo Bay detainees have filed motions asking a U.S. court to block officials from preventing the inmates from taking part in communal prayers during the Islamic holy month of Ramadan. The lawyers argue that in light of the Supreme Court's recent Hobby Lobby decision, the detainees' rights are protected under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, RFRA. The motions were filed this week with the Washington, D.C. District Court on behalf of Ahmad Hassan of Yemen and Ahmed Rabbani of Pakistan. UK-based human rights group Reprieve said both men asked for the intervention after military officials at the prison prevented them from praying communally during Ramadan. So I'm sure that it'll be classified as a nuisance lawsuit and they won't actually make any changes. But it is nice to see that it's not taking any time at all for the repercussions of that ruling to come home to roost.
Tea Earl Grey, hot.
Okay, this segment is on 3D printing news. I personally find it really fascinating. It is probably the closest thing we will ever see to a replicator from Star Trek, and it has immense possibilities, only a few of which we can recognize right now. This first story comes from 3dprintingindustry.com. No dateline on it. I'm guessing it comes from Spain based on who's involved. 3D printing has once again proven vital in the preparation stages of a life-saving surgery as a 5-year-old from Spain named Mark faced a tumor that doctors deemed risky to remove. Since the age of 1, Mark has been diagnosed with a neuroblastoma, a common form of pediatric cancer. Normally, operating on such a tumor can be relatively simple, but due to the network of blood vessels and arteries surrounding Mark's growth, doctors at Hospital Saint Joan de Esplugues de Llobregat, I guess that's how it's pronounced, in Barcelona, feared causing damage to his liver, kidney, and stomach. The article goes on to describe how they tried to operate on him twice before this, and they weren't successful. And so then they did a 3D model of his part of his spine, his kidneys, and the tumor. And it says the hospital enlisted the help of the Foundation CIM de la Universidad Politécnica de Catalunya, UPC, to translate CT, and MRI data into a sophisticated 3D printed model. UPC was able to design an exact copy of the tumor and surrounding area with 2 distinct materials: hard plastic for the blood vessels, kidneys, and spine, and a soft resin for the tumor itself. The team spent 10 days practicing on the model before finally operating on Mark, once again performing a 2-part surgery and successfully removing the tumor. Lucas Crowell, the lead surgeon on the operation, explained how 3D printing was able to make the surgery a success, saying, "The 3D print allowed us to play with the tumor, you could say, and see it well," adding that this surgery is only the first step for a technology that can have many future applications and become more real. The hospital has seen about 35 cases like Mark's over the past 10 years, but now that Mark's tumor has been successfully removed and he will no longer need further surgeries, there may be hope for future such operations. And that's just only one aspect of what the technology can do. You know, when I first heard about it 20 years ago or so, they were talking about how, well, we'll be able to make prototypes and mock-ups and things like that, and nobody then mentioned that, yeah, we'll be able to make up parts of a human body so doctors can practice operating on them before they perform surgery on a human being, so that they have a better chance of a successful outcome on the surgery, which, that's just freaking awesome. And they're not just doing that in Spain. This story also comes from 3dprintingindustry.com. Nicholas Giovinco, assistant professor in the Division of Vascular and endovascular surgery at the University of Arizona, directs the Southern Arizona Limb Salvage Alliance, or SALSA, a team dedicated to advancing diabetic foot care and amputation prevention. Giovinco has taken to a practice that is more and more common in modern hospitals, using 3D printed models to prepare doctors for surgery. The foot and ankle surgeon says before you go into surgery, you need to have a game plan together. And so the doctor has converted CT scans of foot and ankle deformities into 3D printable files to help surgeons know what they're getting into before operating. Made in partnership with Freeside Atlanta, a non-profit workspace, the templates illustrate a variety of diabetic complications, including Charcot foot, a bone-weakening disorder often necessitating surgery. Dr. Giovinco explains that due to neuropathy, these people have lost the gift of pain, and to repair the damage done by Charcot foot, the doctor says it's as though the surgeons are taking a house that's been demolished and putting it back together, piece by piece. It's a little too complicated to quote it directly from the article, but one of the things this doctor is doing is he's taking the computer files of those 3D models and uploading them to a website called Thingiverse. Thingiverse is a website dedicated to 3D printing, and hobbyists and corporations upload their files up there, and anybody can look at them, and many of them are available to download for free. Others of them you have to pay for. But by doing that, it allows the spread of the information, and more people can adopt it and use the techniques or adapt it as it need be. So, that's brilliant. That's not holding an idea close to the chest. That's spreading it out to help people, which is just fantastic. And we need more medical people like him and more, scientist types like him doing things like that for the better of everybody.
On the single condition that you identify the body or the living person of the slave called Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
Okay, now I'm going to try and attempt to complete reading the first chapter of Bible Myths and Their Parallels in Other Religions by T.W. Doan. When we last left our heroes, just kidding, the last part I read that I had to stop because my voice gave out, they were talking about different pagan representations that are identical to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. So, and continues, nearly the same thing was found by Colonel Coombs in the south of India. Colonel Todd, in his History Rajaputana, says, a drawing brought by Colonel Coombs from a sculptured column in a cave temple in the south of India represents the first pair at the foot of the ambrosial tree, and a serpent entwined among the heavily laden boughs, presenting to them some of the fruit from his mouth. The tempter appears to be at that part of his discourse when his words, replete with guile, into her heart too easy entrance won, fixed on the fruit she gazed. This is a curious subject to be engraved on an ancient pagan temple. Now, the really interesting thing is that they have an illustration here representing that drawing. The serpent is in fact a serpent. And I know that sounds weird, but stop and think about it for a moment. In the Bible, God tells the serpent after Adam and Eve that that the serpent is going to lose its legs and have to crawl on the ground. And then this is an illustration of a serpent, not a legged serpent, but a legless serpent. And really don't see too many illustrations of legged serpents. Anyways, back to the text. So the colonel thought, no doubt, but it is not so very curious after all. It is the same myth which we have found, with but such small variations, only as time and circumstances may be expected to produce among different nations in both the Old and New worlds. Figure number 2, taken from the work of Montfaucon, represents one of these ancient pagan sculptures. Can anyone doubt that it is elusive to the myth of which we have been treating in this chapter, that man was originally created a perfect being and is now only a fallen and broken remnant of what he once was? We have seen to be a piece of mythology, not only unfounded in fact, but beyond intelligent question. That's proven untrue. That's kind of an awkward sentence. Let me read that and see if I can't get it better. That man was originally created a perfect being, and is now only a fallen and broken remnant of what he once was. We have seen to be a piece of mythology, not only unfounded in fact, but beyond intelligent question, proven untrue. Wow, that's a really awkward. I hope that makes sense to you. It sort of makes sense to me, but I can read it, and I know sometimes when you can't read something and you're only hearing it, it kind of scrambles things. Anyways, what then is the significance of the exposure of this myth? What does its loss as a scientific fact and as a portion of Christian dogma imply? It implies that with it, although many Christian divines who admit this to be a legend do not profess to see it, must fall the whole orthodox scheme, for upon this myth the theology of Christendom is built. The doctrine of the inspiration of the Scriptures, the fall of man, his total depravity, the incarnation, the atonement, the devil, hell, in fact, the entire theology of the Christian Church falls to pieces with the historical inaccuracy of this story. For upon it is it built. 'Tis the foundation of the whole structure. And there's a footnote. Sir William Jones, the first president of the Royal Asiatic Society, saw this when he said, either the first 11 chapters of Genesis, all due allowance being made for a figurative Eastern style, are true, or the whole fabric of our religion is false. In Asiatic Researches, Volume 1, page 225. And so also did the learned Thomas Morris. For he says, if the Mosaic history be indeed a fable, the whole fabric of the national religion is false, since the main pillar of Christianity rests upon that important original premise, that the seed of the woman should bruise the head of the serpent. And that is sort of how I lost my faith, because when I was sitting in church and they were reading from the Sermon on the Mount, and I realized that whoever wrote that had no concept of, no understanding of humans, and that since we, as members of the Lutheran Church, didn't follow the strictures that Christ laid out against things like divorce, then we couldn't really follow any of it, because none of it made any sense. If you couldn't trust that portion of it, how could you trust the rest of it? And with this, it's saying that, the foundation is the fact that, humans are fallen and they're evil, and they have to be redeemed by Christ. Well, if, as the Catholic Church believes, that's an allegorical story, and it's actually evolution, that humans were, how humans developed, not put in the garden, as the Bible says, where's the original sin come in? Just all falls apart. Okay, back to the book. According to Christian dogma, the incarnation of Christ Jesus had become necessary merely because he had to redeem the evil introduced into the world by the fall of man. These two dogmas cannot be separated from each other. If there was no fall, there is no need of an atonement, and no Redeemer is required. Those, then, who consent in recognizing in Christ Jesus a God and Redeemer, and who, notwithstanding, cannot resolve upon admitting the story of the fall of man to be historical, should exculpate themselves from the reproach of inconsistency. There are a great number, however, in this position at the present day. Although, as we have said, many Christian divines do not, or do not profess to, see the force of the above argument, there are many who do, and they, regardless of their scientific learning, cling to these old myths, professing to believe them, well knowing what must follow with their fall. The following, though written some years ago, will serve to illustrate this style of reasoning. The Bishop of Manchester, England, writing in the Manchester Examiner and Times, said, "The very foundation of our faith, the very basis of our hopes, the very nearest and dearest of our consolations are taken from us when one line of that sacred volume on which we base everything is declared to be untruthful and untrustworthy." The English churchmen, speaking of clergymen who have doubts, said that any who are not thoroughly persuaded that the Scriptures cannot in any particular be untrue should leave the church. The Reverend E. Garbett, M.A., in a sermon preached before the University of Oxford, speaking of the historical truth of the Bible, said, "It is the clear teaching of those doctrinal formularies to which we of the Church of England have expressed our solemn assent, and no honest interpretation of her language can get rid of it, and that, in all consistent reason, we must accept the whole of the inspired autographs or reject the whole." Dr. Bailey, principal of a theological university, St. Aidan's College at Birkenhead, England, and author of a manual called Bailey's Verbal Inspiration, written chiefly for the youths of St. Aidan's College, makes use of the following words in that work. "The whole Bible as a revelation is a declaration of the mind of God towards his creatures on all the subjects of which the Bible treats. The Bible is God's word in the same sense as if he had made use of no human agent, but had himself spoken it. The Bible cannot be less than verbally inspired. Every word, every syllable, every letter is just what it would be had God spoken from heaven without any human intervention. Every scientific statement is infallibly correct, and all its history and narrations of every kind are without any inaccuracy." The above extracts are quoted by Bishop Colenso in the Pentateuch Examined, Volume 2, pages 10 to 12, from which we take them. And if you haven't read, and I can't remember which of his books it is, but Robert Anton Wilson, yeah, I know he was kind of into woo-woo stuff, but he did have some good points. In one of his books, I don't remember if it was the Principia Discordia. I don't think that was it. Anyways, in one of his nonfiction books, he talks about how the for years that they had translations of certain works in Chinese, ancient writings, and they all thought, well, that, you know, they all had one interpretation of what that translation meant. And as researchers over the centuries have found over the years have found older and older versions of those books, they've noticed how the translations have gotten altered over the millennia. And the twists and the turns and the alterations, and not deliberate, but just because the language shifts and people don't understand the meanings of words. And the same thing happened with the Bible. And it's like, well, okay, if you're going to sit there and say, every scientific statement is infallibly correct, and all its history and narrations of every kind are without any inaccuracy, then how do you explain the differences in the various translations? And how do you explain the fact that there's not any archaeological evidence to support many of the things claimed in the Bible? Okay. Enough of my rant, back to the book. A whole volume might be filled with such quotations, not only from religious works and journals published in England, but from those published in the United States of America. Footnote 2. Cosmogony is the title of a volume lately written by Professor Thomas Mitchell and published by the American News Corporation, in which the author attacks all the modern scientists in regard to the geological antiquity of the world, evolution, atheism, pantheism, and so on. He believes, and rightly too, that
if the account of creation in Genesis falls, Christ and the apostles follow. If the book of Genesis is erroneous, so also are the Gospels.
And remember, the book I'm reading from was written in the 1880s. And that is the end of the chapter. I didn't realize I had that little left to go when I stopped last time. Okay, so since my voice seems pretty good, and I figure once I get everything edited down, this will be less than a half an hour what I've recorded so far. So I'm going to go ahead and try to do all of chapter 2, which may put the episode's final length over just over an hour, but it probably won't be too much over an hour. Chapter 2, the Deluge. After man's shameful fall, the earth began to be populated at a very rapid rate. The sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also mighty men of renown. Okay? Footnote. There were giants in the earth in those days. It is a scientific fact that most races of men in former ages, instead of being larger, were smaller than at the present time. There is hardly a suit of armor in the Tower of London or in the old castles that is large enough for the average Englishman of today to put on. Man has grown in stature as well as intellect, and there is no proof whatsoever, in fact the opposite is certain, that there ever was a race of what might be properly called giants inhabiting the earth. Fossil remains of large animals having been found by primitive man, and a legend invented to account for them, it would naturally be that there were giants in the earth in those days. As an illustration, we may mention the story recorded by the traveler James Orton. We believe in the Andes and the Amazon that near Punin in South America was found the remains of an extinct species of the horse, the mastodon, and other large animals. This discovery was made owing to the assurance of the natives that giants at one time had lived in that country, and that they had seen their remains at this certain place. Many legends have had similar origin, but the originals of all the ogres and giants to be found in the mythology of almost all nations of antiquity are the famous Hindu demons, the Rakshas of our Aryan ancestors. The Rakshas were very terrible creatures indeed, and in the minds of many people in India are so still. Their natural form, so the stories say, is that of huge, unshapely giants like clouds with hair and beard of the color of the red lightning. This description explains their origin. They are the dark, wicked, and cruel clouds personified. And that is the end of that footnote. One thing I want to check, there was some program on the History Channel or one of the cable networks that vaguely science related at one time, but now, of course, like most of the cable channels, has gone to shit, where they went to a place in Greece that is fairly well known, and I believe it was on the coast, and they showed all these fossil bones in the hills, in the cliffs that were sticking out, and they were, the area where they were sticking out was some of the most, those areas were tied with some of the famous legends of things like centaurs and things like that in Greek mythology. And so their speculation is the Greeks saw the fossil bones in the hill, in the rocks, and made the stories up to explain them. Okay. Back up to the main text. But these giants and mighty men were very wicked, and God saw the wickedness of man, and it repented the Lord that he hath made men upon the earth. Okay, there's a footnote, but before we interject that, just want to point out that, we're not getting an explanation of where the women came from. We have Adam and Eve being created by God, and then and they give birth to Cain and Abel. Okay? So where do women come from? Did Cain and Abel, before Cain killed Abel, did they have the butt sex and Abel, give birth to some women? There's no mention of that. Okay, now to the footnote. And screw it. I'm going to skip it. Because it's just quotes. It's just referencing to where it is this found in the Bible. Okay. So we'll go back to the beginning of the sentence. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also mighty men, men of renown. I fucked that up. But these giants and mighty men were very wicked, and God saw the wickedness of man, and he repented the Lord that he hath made man upon the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, for Noah was a just man, and walked with God. And Noah said unto Noah, and God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Make room shalt thou make in the ark, and a window shalt thou make to the ark. And behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee I shall establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee.
and of every living thing, of all flesh. 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee. They shall be male and female, of fowls after their kind, and of cattle after their kind, of every creeping thing of the earth after his kind. 2 of every sort shall come into thee, to keep them alive. And take thou unto thee of all food that is eaten, and thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be for food for thee and for them.
Thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him. When the ark was finished, the Lord said unto Noah,
Come thou and all thy house into the ark. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by 7s, the male and his female, the male and his female, of fowls also of the air by 7s, the male and his female.
Here again, as in the Eden myth, there is a contradiction. We have seen that the Lord told Noah to bring into the ark of every living thing of all flesh 2 of every sort. And now that the ark is finished, we are told that he said to him, Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by 7s, and of fowls also of the air by 7s. This is owing to the story have been written by 2 different writers, the Jehovistic and the Elohistic, one of which took from and added to the narrative of the other. The account goes on to say that Noah went in, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him into the ark, of clean beasts and of beasts that are not clean, and of fowls, and of everything that creepeth upon the earth. There went in 2 and 2 unto Noah into the ark, the male and the female, as God had commanded Noah. The image of Osiris of Egypt, this is a footnote, was by the priest shut up in the... let me start that footnote over again. The image of Osiris of Egypt was by the priest shut up in a sacred ark on the 17th of Athir, November 13th, the very day and month on which Noah is said to have entered his ark. See Bonnewick's Egyptian Belief, page 165, and Bunsen's Angel Messiah, page 22. Back to the main text. We see then that Noah took into the ark all kinds of beasts, of fowls, and of everything that creepeth, 2 of every sort, and that this was as God had commanded Noah. This clearly shows the writer of these words knew nothing of the command to take in clean beasts and fowls of the air by 7s. We are further assured that Noah did according to all that the Lord had commanded him. After Noah and his family, and every beast after his kind, and all the cattle after their kind, the fowls of the air, and every creeping thing had entered the ark, the Lord shut them in. Then were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. And all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl, and of cattle, and of beast, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man. And Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. The object of the flood was now accomplished. All flesh died that moved upon the earth. Okay, well, what about the stuff that lived in the water? The Lord, therefore, made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained, and the waters decreased continually. And it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent forth a raven, which went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up from off the earth. He also sent forth a dove, but the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, and she returned unto him in the ark. At the end of 7 days he again sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came in to him in the evening, and lo, in her mouth was an olive leaf plucked off. Where the fuck did that olive leaf come from? I mean, I don't know how long it takes for an olive tree to grow, but, it's been underwater for 80 days. It can't have been, but anyways. At the end of another 7 days he again sent forth the dove, which returned not again to him any more. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. Then Noah and his wife and his sons' wives, and every living thing that was in the ark went forth out of the ark. And Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor. And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. Okay, here's my question. God created everything in a week, roughly. So he wants to wipe out all humanity except for a handful. Why doesn't he just uncreate humanity? It wouldn't take 40 days. No, it wouldn't have had to build an ark. And you wouldn't have had a bunch of dead animals. Wouldn't have been a lot of suffering. It just doesn't make any sense. We shall now see that there is scarcely any considerable race among whom there does not exist in some form the tradition of a great deluge, which destroyed all of the human race except their own progenitors. The first of these, which we shall notice, and the one from which the Hebrew agrees most closely, having been copied from it, is the Chaldean, as given by Berosus, the Chaldean historian. And I got footnotes. Let me check. Okay. Josephus, the Jewish historian, speaking of the flood of Noah, Antiquities, Book 1, Chapter 3, says, all the writers of the Babylonian histories make mention of this flood and this ark. Back up to the main text. It is as follows. After the death of Ardates, the 9th king of the Chaldeans, his son Xisuthrus, Xisuthrus, reigned 18 Sari. In his time happened a great deluge, the history of which is thus described. The deity Kronos appeared to him, Xisuthrus, in a vision, and warned him that upon the 15th day of the month Decius there would be a flood, by which mankind would be destroyed. He therefore enjoined him to write a history of the beginning, procedure, and conclusion of all things, and to bury it in the city of the sun at Sippara, and to build a vessel, and to take with him into it his friends and relations, and to convey on board everything necessary to sustain life together with all the different animals, both birds and quadrupeds, and trust himself fearlessly to the deep. Having asked the deity whither he was to sail, he was answered, to the gods, upon which he offered up a prayer for the good of mankind. He then obeyed the divine admonition and built a vessel 5 stadia in length and 2 in breadth. Into this he put everything which he had prepared, and last of all conveyed into it his wife, his children, and his friends. Hey, that puts him one up on Noah, don't it? After the flood had been upon the earth, and was in time abated, Xisuthros sent out birds from the vessel, which, not finding any food, nor any place whereupon they might rest their feet, returned to him again. After an interval of some days, he sent them forth a second time, and they now returned with their feet tinged with mud. He made a trial a third time with these birds, but they returned to him no more. From whence he judged that the surface of the earth had appeared above the waters. He therefore made an opening in the vessel, and upon looking out found that it was stranded upon the side of some mountain, upon which he immediately quitted it with his wife, his daughter, and the pilot. Xisuthros then paid his adoration to the earth, having constructed an altar, offered sacrifices to the gods. Okay, footnote quoted by George Smith, Chaldean Account of Genesis, pages 42 to 44. See also the Pentateuch Examined, Volume 4, page 211, Dunlap's Spiritual History, page 138, Corey's Ancient Fragments, page 61, etc., for similar accounts. Now, there was a guy who works at one of the British museums, and I don't know off the top of my head. I guess it's just the British Museum. Anyways, his name is Irving Finkel, and somebody walked in and said, "Hey, can you tell me about this old tablet that I've got?" And Finkel, being an expert in cuneiform, looked at it and said, "Holy shit, you have the oldest copy of the flood story known to man." And he translated it, and it predates all the other accounts that we have from the Babylonian area. And the difference, the one difference in it that's rather remarkable is that the ark is round rather than the boat shape you kind of see, or the square shape you kind of see. It was round, and that part of Iraq, or that section of the Mideast where the account was written, that was the kinds of boats that they used on the rivers. They were, of course, significantly smaller, but it was the same design. He's got a book out on it, and somebody's doing a documentary where they're like reconstructing that size of a boat to see, what it would be like. Obviously, it would not be nearly large enough to hold all the animals, but it's pretty neat thing that this just happened so recently. And it was last year that story came out. Okay, back to Bible Myths. This account given by Berosus, which agrees in almost every particular with that found in Genesis and with that found by George Smith of the British Museum on terracotta tablets in Assyria, is nevertheless different in some respects. But, says Mr. Smith, when we consider the differences between the two countries of Palestine and Babylonia, these variations do not appear greater than we should expect. It was only natural that, in relating the same stories, each nation should color them in accordance with its own ideas, and stress would naturally in each case be laid upon points with which they were familiar. Thus we should expect beforehand that there would be differences in the narrative such as we actually find. And we may also notice that the cuneiform account does not always coincide even with the account of the same events given by Berosus from Chaldean sources. Okay. The most important points are the same, however, i.e., in both cases, the virtuous man is informed by the Lord that a flood is about to take place, which would destroy mankind. In both cases, they are commanded to build a vessel or ark, to enter it with their families, and to take in beasts, birds, and everything that creepeth, also to provide themselves with food. In both cases, they send out a bird from the ark 3 times. The third time, it failed to return. In both cases, they land on a mountain, and upon leaving the ark, they offer up a sacrifice to the gods. Xisthus was the 10th king, and Noah was the 10th patriarch. Xisthus had 3 sons, Zerovanos, Titan, and Japethestes, Japetosthes. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japhet. As Corey remarks in his Ancient Fragments, the history of the flood, as given by Berosus, so remarkably corresponds with the biblical account of the Noachian deluge that no one can doubt that both proceeded from one source. They are evidently transcriptions, except the names, from some ancient document. And there's a footnote. The Hindu Ark preserved Menu had 3 sons, Sama, Kama, Prajapati, Prajapati. Faber, Original Pagan Idols. The Bahitas, who live between Delhi and the Punjab, insist that they are descended from a certain king called Salivana, Salivahana, who had 3 sons, Bahat, Bhat, Maha, Maha, and Thamaz, Thamaz. Colonel Wilford in Volume 9, Asiatic Researches. The Iranian hero, Thraetona, Thraetona, had 3 sons. The Iranian Sethite, Lamech, had 3 sons. And Hellen, Hellen, the son of Denkalion, during whose time the flood is said to have happened, had 3 sons. Bunsen, the Angel Messiah, pages 70 and 71. All the ancient nations of Europe also describe their origins from the 3 sons of some king or patriarch. The Germans said that Manus, son of the god Tuisco, Tuisco, had 3 sons, who were the original ancestors of the 3 principal nations of Germany. The Scythians said that Targitagus, Targytagus, the founder of their nation, had 3 sons, from whom they were descended. A tradition among the Romans was that Cyclop Polyphemus had by Galatea 3 sons. Saturn had 3 sons, Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto. And Hesiod speaks of the 3 sons which spring from the marriage of heaven and earth. See Mallett's Northern Antiquities. Okay. Back up to the main text. This legend became known to the Jews from Chaldean sources. It was not known in the country, Egypt, out of which they evidently came. Footnote. It is of no slight moment that the Egyptians, with whom the Hebrews are represented as in earliest and closest intercourse, had no traditions of a flood, while the Babylonian and Hellenic tales bear a strong resemblance to many points to the... Let me try that again. It is of no slight moment that the Egyptians, with whom the Hebrews are represented as in the earliest and closest intercourse, had no traditions of a flood, while the Babylonian and Hellenic tales bear a strong resemblance in many points to the narrative in Genesis. Reverend George W. Cox, Tales of Ancient Greece, page 340. See also Owen, Man's Earliest History, page 28. So, the Egyptians had no flood myth. Kind of interesting, considering that the Nile flooded annually. Egyptian history, it is said, had gone on uninterrupted for 10,000 years before the time assigned for the birth of Jesus. Footnote. See Taylor's Diegesis, page 198, and Knight's Ancient Art and Mythology, page 107. Plato was told that Egypt had hymns BC. Herodotus relates that the priests of Egypt informed him that from the first king to the present priest of Vulcan who had last reigned, there were 341 generations of men, and during these generations there were the same number of chief priests and kings. Now, says he, 300 generations are equal to 10,000 years, for 3 generations of men are 100 years. And the 41 remaining generations that were over the 300 make 1,340 years, making 11,340 years. Conducting me into the interior of an edifice that was spacious, and showing me wooden colossuses to the number I have mentioned, they reckoned them up, for every high priest places an image of himself there during his lifetime. The priest, therefore, reckoning them and showing them to me, pointed out that each was the son of his own father, going through them all from the image of him who died last until they had pointed them all out. Herodotus, Book 2, chapters 142, 143. The discovery of mummies of royal and priestly personage made at Deir el-Bahari, August 1881, near Thebes in Egypt, would seem to confirm the statement made by Herodotus. Of the 39 mummies discovered, one, that of King Raskenen, Raskenen, is about 3,700 years old. See A. Cairo, August 8th, letter to the London Times. Okay. Now I'll go back up to the main text. I don't know if we can go 10,000 years before Jesus, but they did extend back to considerable ways. And it is known as absolute fact that the land of Egypt was never visited by other than its annual beneficent overflow of the river Nile. The Egyptian Bible, which is by far the most ancient of all holy books, knew nothing of the deluge. The Pharaoh, or Pharaoh, Khufu Cheops, was building his pyramid, according to Egyptian Chronicle, when the whole world was under the waters of a universal deluge, according to the Hebrew Chronicle. Now, there's an interesting thought. The Egyptian records say, we were building temple, we were building the pyramids. And the Hebrew records say, you were underwater. And then, of course, you have to ask, well, wasn't it the Hebrew slaves who built the pyramids? So were they doing it underwater, the Aquaman or something? Which, I mean, silly, because the evidence for the Jews actually being slaves in Egypt is pretty thin. There were apparently a large number of them there, but they weren't slaves. They were, hired help. I mean, not just, when I say hired help, I mean they were, in some cases engineers. They weren't just, not stupid, but they weren't laborers. They were, soldiers or craftsmen or things like that. At least according to some accounts. Other accounts differ. Back back to the text. A number of other nations of antiquity are found destitute of any story of a flood, which they certainly would have had if a universal deluge had ever happened. Whether this legend is of high antiquity in India has even been doubted by distinguished scholars. And there's a footnote, and I'm trying to see, but it's not really anything. It's just, see, it's not detailed and doesn't provide any additional info. Okay. The Hindu legend of the deluge is as follows. Many ages after the creation of the world, Brahma resolved to destroy it with the deluge on account of the wickedness of the people. There lived at that time a pious man, Satyavrata. And as the Lord of the universe loved this pious man and wished to preserve him from the sea of destruction which was to appear on account of the depravity of the age, he appeared before him in the form of Vishnu, the preserver, and said, "In 7 days from the present time, the worlds will be plunged into an ocean of death, but in the midst of the destroying waves, a large vessel, sent by me for thy use, shall stand before thee. Then shalt thou take all medicinal herbs, all the variety of feeds, and accompanied by 7 saints, encircled by pairs of all brute animals, thou shalt enter the spacious ark, and continue in it, secure from the flood, on one immense ocean without light, except the radiance of thy holy companions. When the ship shall be agitated by an impetuous wind, thou shalt fasten it with a large sea serpent on my horn, for I will be near thee in the form of a fish, drawing the vessel with thee and thy attendants. I will remain on the ocean, O chief of men, until a night of Brahma shall be completely ended. Then shalt know my true greatness, and rightly named the Supreme Godhead by my favor. All thy questions shall be answered, and thy mind abundantly instructed." Hey, look at that. I kind of like that guy. He doesn't walk up to the dude and say, "Hey, look, I'm going to kill everybody but you and your family, so get to building a boat so you don't die." He walks up to the guy and says, "I'm going to be killing everybody but you and your family, and don't worry about nothing. I got a boat coming for ya." I mean, that's cool. You just hang out, pack your shit up, and then when, the boat shows, you're on your way. Being thus directed, Satyavrata humbly waited for the time which the ruler of our senses had appointed. It was not long, however, before the sea, overwhelming its shores, began to deluge the whole earth, and it was soon perceived to be. It was not long, however, before the earth, overwhelming its shores, began to deluge the whole earth, and it was soon perceived to be augmented by showers from immense clouds. He, still meditating on the commands of the Lord, saw a vessel advancing, and entered it with the saints, after having carried into effect the instructions which had been given him. Vishnu then appeared before him in the form of a fish, as he had said, and Satyavrata fastened a cable to his horn. The deluge in time abated, and Satyavrata, instructed in all divine and human knowledge, was appointed, by the favor of Vishnu, the 7th Menu. Vishnu then appeared before them in the form of a fish, as he had said, and Satyavrata fastened a cable to his horn. The deluge in time abated, and Satyavrata, instructed in all divine and human knowledge, was appointed, by the favor of Vishnu, the 7th Menu. After coming forth from the ark, he offers up a sacrifice to Brahma. Translated from the Bhagavad. I don't know if it's the Bhagavad Gita or just a different Bhagavad. By Sir William Jones, published in the first volume of the Asiatic Researches, page 230, and so on. See also Maurice, Indian Antiquities, chapter 2, 272, and so on, or page 277, and so on, and Professor Max Mueller's History of Ancient Sanskrit Literature, page 425. Okay. The ancient temples, back to the main text now. The ancient temples of Hindustan contain representations of Vishnu sustaining the earth while overwhelmed by the waters of the deluge. A rainbow is seen on the surface of the subsiding waters. The Chinese believe the earth to have been at one time covered with water, which they described as flowing abundantly and then subsiding. This great flood divided the higher from the lower age of man. It happened during the reign of Yao. This inundation, which is termed Hong Shui, great water, almost ruined the country and is spoken of by Chinese writers with sentiments of horror. The Shu King, which maybe that's the I Ching, I don't know. One of their sacred books describes the waters as reaching to the tops of some of the mountains, covering the hills and expanding as wide as the vault of heaven. Okay, so, you know what? One of the things that annoys me about some of the podcasts I listen to is somebody will have a question, and it's like, dude, you're sitting at a fucking computer, you got goddamn Google, why don't you ask it? So that's what I'm going to do, and see if I can figure out what the Shu King, ancient China, look at that. That pulls it up. Book of okay. Let me grab the Wikipedia entry. That wasn't the first hit. It's called, the English translation of the title would be Book of Documents, and it's also known as Shang Shu. The Book of Documents, Shu Jing, earlier Shu King, or classical history, also known as the Shang Shu, is one of the 5 classics of ancient Chinese literature. It is a collection of rhetorical prose attributed to figures of ancient China and served as the foundation of Chinese political philosophy for over 2,000 years. Boom! Look at that. Fucking Google's amazing. And you know what else is amazing? I took fucking Chinese history in college, and the goddamn professor spent 5 years working for the State Department in fucking China. And I'd never heard of this book. Amazing. Of course, he might have mentioned it, but I was working 60, 70 hours a week at the time, so fuck if I can remember anything. I couldn't remember anything then. I only passed that class because he liked me. But yeah, wow, I am going to have to get a copy of that. Now, back to the main text. The Shu King, one of their sacred books, describes the waters as reaching to the tops of some of the mountains, covering the hills, and expanding as wide as the vault of heaven. The Parsis say that by the temptation of the evil spirit men became wicked, and God destroyed them with a deluge, except a few, from whom the world was populated anew. In the Zend Avesta, the oldest sacred book of the Persians, of whom the Parsis are direct descendants, there are 16 countries spoken of as having been given by Ormuzd, the good deity, for the Aryans to live in. And these countries are described as a land of delight, which was turned by Ahriman, the evil deity, into a land of death and cold, partly, it is said, by a great flood, which is described as being like Noah's flood recorded in the book of Genesis. And that's a new page. Let me scroll down and take a look at the footnotes here, see if any of them are interesting. Okay, so next couple. The ancient Greeks had records of a flood which destroyed nearly the whole human race. Footnote. The oldest Greek mythology, however, has no such idea. It cannot be proved to have been known to the Greeks earlier than the 6th century BC. See Goldziher, Hebrew Mythology, page 319. This could not have been the case had there ever been a universal deluge. This story is as follows. From his throne in the high Olympus, Zeus looked down upon the children of men and saw that everywhere they followed only their lusts and cared nothing for right or for law. And ever, as their hearts waxed grosser in their wickedness, they devised for themselves new rites to appease the anger of the gods, till the whole earth was filled with blood. Far away in the hidden glens of the Akkadian hills, the sons of Lycaonen feasted and spake proud words against the majesty of Zeus. And Zeus himself came down from his throne to see their way and their doings. Then Zeus returned to his home on Olympus, and he gave word that a flood of water should be let loose upon the earth, that the sons of men might die for their great wickedness. So the west wind rose in its might, and the dark rain clouds veiled the whole heaven. For the winds of the north, which drive away the mists and vapors, were shut up in their prison house. On a hill and valley burst the merciless rain, and the rivers, loosened from their courses, rushed over the whole plains and up the mountainside. From his home on the highlands of Phthia, Deucalion, Deucalion, looked forth on the angry sky, and when he saw the waters swelling in the valleys beneath, he called Pyrrha, Pyrrha, his wife, and said to her, "The time has come of which my father the wise Prometheus forewarned me. Make ready, therefore, the ark which I have built, and place in it all that we may need for food while the flood of waters is out upon the earth." Then Pyrrha hastened to make all things ready, and they waited till the waters rose up to the highlands of Phthia and floated away in the ark of Deucalion. The fishes swam amidst the old elm groves, entwined amongst the gnarled boughs on the oaks, while on the face of the waters were tossed the bodies of men, and Deucalion looked on the dead faces of stalwart warriors, of maidens and of babes, as they rose and fell upon the heavy waves. When the flood began to abate, the ark rested on Mount Parnassus, and Deucalion, with his wife Pyrrha, stepped forth upon the desolate earth. They then immediately constructed an altar and offered up thanks to Zeus, the mighty being who sent the flood and saved them from its waters. Footnote, the Tales of Ancient Greece, page 72 to 74. Apollodorus, a Grecian mythologist born 140 BC, having mentioned Deucalion consigned to the ark, takes notice upon his quitting it of his offering up an immediate sacrifice to God. Well, that was kind of a pointless footnote, but I just think it's interesting he makes a sacrifice to Zeus when it was Prometheus who told him, "Yo, son, get yourself an ark and get ready, 'cause the shit gonna get bad." But hey, Zeus was a bit of a prick. According to Ovid, a Grecian writer born 43 BC, Deucalion does not venture out of the ark until a dove, which he sent out, returns to him with an olive branch. And the footnote, it's just talking about a drawing. It was at one time extensively believed, even by intelligent scholars, that the myth of Deucalion was a corrupted tradition of the Noachian deluge. But this untenable opinion is now all but universally abandoned. The legend was found in the West among the Celts. They believed that a great deluge overwhelmed the world and drowned all men except Draion and Droivach, who escaped in a boat and colonized Britain. Wait, is this another one of those, it says drowned all men except Draion and Droivach? Is this another one of those things where it's like, it's only dudes? Wow, that's kind of weird. The boat was supposed to have been built by the Heavenly Lord, and it received into it a pair of every kind of beasts. The ancient Scandinavians had their legend of a deluge. The Edda describes this deluge from which only one man escapes with his family by means of a bark. A bark, by the way, in case you don't know, is a kind of small boat. It was also found among the ancient Mexicans. They believed that a man named Cox, C-O-X, and his wife survived the deluge. Lord Kingsborough, speaking of this legend, informs us that the person who answered to Noah entered the ark with 6 others, and that the story of sending birds out of the ark and so on is the same in general character with that of the Bible. Dr. Brinton also speaks of the Mexican tradition. They had not only the story of sending out the bird, but related that the ark landed on a mountain. The tradition of a deluge was also found among the Brazilians and among many Indian tribes. The mountain upon which the ark is supposed to have rested was pointed to by the residents of nearly every quarter of the globe. The mountain chain of Ararat was considered to be by the Chaldeans and Hebrews the place where the ark landed. The Greeks pointed to Mount Parnassus, the Hindus to the Himalayas, and in Armenia, numberless heights were pointed out with becoming reverence as those on which the few survivors of the dreadful scenes of the deluge were preserved. On the Red River, in America, near the village of the Caddos, there was an eminence to which the Indian tribes for a great distance around paid devout homage. The Cerro Nazartani, Cerronaztarny, on the Rio Grande, the peak of the Old Zuni in New Mexico, that of Colhuacan on the Pacific coast, Mount Apola in Upper Mixteca, Mixteca, and Mount Neba in the province of Guaymi, Guyami, are some of the many elevations asserted by the neighboring nations to have been places of refuge for their ancestors when the fountains of the deep broke forth. The question now may naturally be asked, how could such a story have originated unless there was some foundation for it? In answer to this question, we will say that we do not think such a story could have originated without some foundation for it, and that most, if not all, legends have a basis of truth underlying the fabulous, although not always discernible. This story may have an astronomical basis, as some suppose, or it may not. At any rate, it would be very easy to transmit by memory the fact of the sinking of an island, or that of an earthquake, or a great flood caused by overflows of rivers and such. which in the course of time would be added to and enlarged upon, and in this way made into quite a lengthy tale. According to one of the most ancient accounts of the deluge, we are told that at the time the forest trees were dashed against each other, the mountains were involved with smoke and flame, that there was fire and smoke and wind which ascended in thick clouds replete with lightning. The roaring of the ocean, whilst violently agitated with the whirling of the mountains, was like the bellowing of a mighty cloud, and so on. And there's a footnote. Count de Volney says, the deluge mentioned by the Jews, Chaldeans, Greeks, and Indians as having destroyed the world are one and the same physical astronomical event which is still repeated every year, and that all those personages that figure in the deluge of Noah and Sisyphus are still in the celestial sphere. It was a real picture of the calendar. Researches in Ancient History, page 124. It was on the same day that Noah is said to have shut himself up in the ark that the priests of Egypt shut up in their sacred coffer or ark the image of Osiris, a personification of the sun. This was on the 17th of the month Hathor, in which the sun enters the scorpion. See Kenrick's Egypt, Volume 1, page 410. The history of Noah also corresponds in some respects with that of Bacchus, another personification of the sun. And I will say that on one of these podcasts related, his Bible Geek podcast, Robert Price mentions that the story of I think it's Ham or Shem. Anyways, one of Noah's kids walking in and seeing Noah butt naked after being drunk, and they cover Noah up and walk out, and when Noah wakes up the next morning, he curses the one kid who saw him and says, you're gonna be black from now on. Robert Price says that's most likely, the alterations to the story are that it is some kind of castration myth involving the sun god, which would put it, I don't remember if Zeus castrated his father or not, but it's not terribly uncommon that in certain sun god mythologies that certain mythologies that the child of a god would castrate the father god. Okay, back to the text. A violent earthquake with eruptions from volcanic mountains and the sinking of land into the sea would evidently produce such a scene as this. We know that at one period in Earth's history, such scenes must have been of frequent occurrence. The science of geology demonstrates this fact to us. Local deluges were of frequent occurrence, and that some persons may have been saved on one or perhaps many such occasions by means of a raft or boat, and that they may have sought refuge on an eminence or mountain does not seem all improbable. Okay, now I have got to hold up there for a second, and I'm going to babble because I learned about something the other day that's rather interesting, and I want to see if this is somehow possibly related. It turns out that in roughly the same time that Ireland converted to Catholicism, it's thought that a large hunk of Halley's Comet broke off and hit on Earth, and this caused massive climate disruptions, and it was this that led to the conversion of Ireland to Catholicism, because the Christian missionaries who were in Ireland were pointing to all the stuff falling out of the sky, saying, "It's revelations. The world is ending." And and apparently the the Irish pagans didn't have any legends that would necessarily account for that, so they followed they switched to Christianity because they're like, well, if the world's going to end, we better be Christians so we can join with Jesus. So I'm pulling this thing up on Halley's comment on Wikipedia, and I want to see, okay, the earliest estimate that they have that it might have been seen is 240 BC in May. That's interesting. Of course, I mean, there's an estimate that it may have been seen as far back as 467. It says a comet was recorded in ancient Greece between 468 and 466 BC. Its timing, location, duration, and associated meteor shower all suggest it was Halley. According to Pliny the Elder, that same year, a meteorite fell in the town of Aegospotami, Aegospotami, in Thrace. He described it as brown in color and the size of a wagon load. Chinese chroniclers also mention a comet in that year. I am going to have to do some digging on that one, because that is awfully freaking interesting. I wonder if what the climate would have been like in 540, or not 540. 467 BC. Come on, I'm trying to get a pen to work, but it keeps kicking stuff. 467. Is that it? Is that the date? Let me make sure. BC. Yep, 467. Okay. Now, back to the text. Okay. During the Champlain period in the history of the world, which came after the glacial period, the climate became warmer, the continents sank, and there were consequently continued local floods, which must have destroyed considerable animal life, including man. The foundation of the deluge myth may have been laid at this time. Okay, and I am going to Google the Champlain period because I want an idea when that might have been. Champlain. Really? You don't have... So it doesn't... I have to go to a dictionary and there's no... Okay, so it doesn't give you a date. I'm gonna go to freaking Wikipedia and see if I can't find something about that, because I want to know the date. Got 3,600 results. Nothing. We'll go with glacial period. Quaternary period. Okay. So they don't call it the Champlain period anymore, apparently, at least not according to Wikipedia. But that would have put it. Let me reread that section here real quick. During the Champlain period in the history of the world, which came after the glacial period, the climate became warmer, the continents sank. Okay, so that puts it about 15,000 years ago, because that's when the last glacial period is supposed to have ended. Now, supposedly in the 1800s in Canada, some researchers were talking to some Native Americans and getting tales from them, and they had tales of hunting down and killing mammoths, which I think the mammoths went extinct about 40,000 years ago. I know some of the Australian tales are supposed to be that old. It just seems weird to me that an oral legend could continue that long. I mean, it may be possible. After all, we don't know when even the story of precisely when some of the stories that we do know actually happened. We don't know exactly when they happened. Like the Siege of Troy. We've got, it's not that far back, but it's still, we've got a period within a few years where we think, it was this, it may have been this year or that year, or it could have been these other years. So who knows? Okay. Some suppose that this is dating the history of man too far back, making his history too remote, but such is not the case. There is every reason to believe that man existed for ages before the glacial epoch. It must not be supposed that we have yet found remains of the earliest human beings. There is evidence, however, that man existed during the Pliocene, if not during the Miocene periods, when hoofed quadrupeds and proboscidians abounded, human remains and implements having been found mingled with the remains of these animals. Footnote 1. In America, along with the bones of the mastodon embedded in the alluvium of the Bourbons, Bourbense, were found arrowheads and other traces of the savages who had killed this member of an order no longer represented in that part of the world. Herbert Spencer, Principles of Sociology, Volume 1, page 17. And was it 70,000 years ago that one of the mountains erupted in, I don't know if it was Etna, but in the Mediterranean, erupted, and it reduced the human population down to a mere, handful, like, maybe as low as 2,000. Could it be a remnant of that? I don't know. Charles Darwin believed that the animal called man might have been properly called by that name at an epoch as remote as the Eocene period. There's a footnote, and it's a table. I'm trying to... No one doesn't give you a date. Let me see here. I have some idea. Oh, wow. That would put it nearly 40 million years ago. That's a bit farther than we've actually found anything. Because Lucy is only, I think, 3 million years old at the most. Maybe not even that much. I know we found our ape-like ancestor single million-year digit, but not double digits like that. Man had probably lost his hairy covering by that time and had begun to look human. Professor Draper, speaking of the antiquity of man, says, so far as investigations have gone, they indisputably refer to the existence of man to a date remote from us by many hundreds of thousands of years, and that it is difficult to assign a shorter date from the last glaciation of Europe than 250,000 years, and human existence antedates that. Again, he says, recent researches give reason to believe that under low and base grades, the existence of man can be traced back into the tertiary times. He was contemporary with the southern elephant, the rhinoceros leptorinus, the great hippopotamus, perhaps even in the Miocene, contemporary with the mastodon. Professor Huxley closes his evidence as to man's place in nature by saying, Where must we look for primeval man? Was the oldest Homo sapiens Pliocene or Miocene, or yet more ancient? If any form of the doctrine of progressive development is correct, we must extend by long epochs the most liberal estimate that has yet been made of the antiquity of man. And it's a footnote, but it's nothing. Professor Oscar Paschal, in his work on mankind, speaking of the deposits of human remains which have been discovered in caves mingled with bones of wild animals, says, The examination of one of these caves at Brixham by a geologist as trustworthy as Dr. Falconer convinced the specialists of Great Britain as early as 1858 that man was a contemporary of the mammoth, the woolly rhinoceros, the cave lion, the cave hyena, the cave bear, and therefore of the mammalia of the geological period antecedent to our own. And I'm going to go to another digression here, because they just found a yes. Okay. Let me just pull. I'm trying to find a decent news source. Scientific American. Here we go. Let me pull this up. Just because it's related and it's a kind of a neat news story. And it's dated May 15th of this year. Discovery of Mexican skeleton connects Siberian ancestors to Native Americans. DNA from the skeleton shows similarities to modern Native Americans, while its skull structure matches those of Paleo-Americans that came across the Bering Land Bridge. The near-intact skeleton of a delicately built teenage girl who died more than 12,000 years ago in what is today's Mexico could help solve the riddle of the Americas, of how the Americas were first populated. Cave divers discovered the skeleton 7 years ago in a complex of flooded caverns known as Hoyo Negro in the jungles of the Yucatan Peninsula. They called her Naya after the Naiads, the water nymphs of Greek mythology. She lies in a collapsed chamber together with the remains of 26 other large mammals, including a saber-toothed tiger 600 meters from the nearest sinkhole. Most of the mammals became extinct around 13,000 years ago. You have this here saying, this is what we found. You know, we just found this. It's in a cave. And it just reinforces something that that scientists have been talking about since the 1800s. I mean, it's one of those neat little things where, science predicts something, and damned if it doesn't just nail it. Okay. I'll tweet out that link because it is an interesting story if you haven't heard about it or read it. Okay, now back to the text. The positive evidence of man's existence during the Tertiary period are facts which must firmly convince everyone who is willing to be convinced of the great antiquity of man. We might multiply our authorities, but deem it unnecessary. The observation of shells, corals, and other remains of aquatic animals in places above the level of the sea, and even on high mountains, may have given rise to legends of a great flood. Fossils found embedded in high ground have been appealed to, both in ancient and modern times, both by savage and civilized men, as evidence in support of their traditions of a flood, and moreover, the argument, apparently unconnected with any tradition, is to be found that because there are marine fossils in places away from the sea, therefore the sea must once have been there. It is only quite recently that the presence of fossil shells, etc., on high mountains has been abandoned as evidence of the Noachian flood. Mr. Tyler tells us that in the 9th edition of Horne's Introduction to the Scriptures, published in 1846, evidence of fossils is confidently held to prove the universality of the deluge, but the argument disappears from the next edition, published 10 years later. And a footnote just is Tyler, Early History of Mankind, page 328, 329, 330. There's nothing that tells us why they threw it out. I mean, at this point in time, plate tectonics wasn't a theory. Okay, back to the text. Besides fossil remains of aquatic animals, boats have been found on tops of mountains. Footnote. We know that many legends have originated this way. For example, Dr. Robinson, in his travels in Palestine, mentions a tradition that a city had once stood in a desert between Petra and Hebron, the people of which had perished for their vice and had been converted into stone. Mr. Seetzen, Seetzen, who went to the spot, found no traces of ruins, but a number of stony concretions resembling in form and size the human head. They had been ignorantly supposed to be petrified heads, and a legend framed to account for their owners suffering so terrible a fate. Another illustration is as follows. The Kamchadals, Kamchadals, believe that volcanic mountains are the abode of devils, who, after they have cooked their meals, fling the firebrands out of the chimney. Being asked what these devils eat, they said, whales. Here we see first a story invented to account for the volcanic eruptions from the mountains, and second, a story invented to account for the remains of whales found on the mountains. The savages knew that this was true because their old people had said so and believed it themselves. Related by Mr. Tyler in his Early History of Mankind, page 326. Okay, back to the main text. A discovery of this kind may have given rise to the story of an ark having been made in which to and of its landing on a mountain. Before closing this chapter, it may be well to notice a striking incident in the legend we have been treating, i.e., the frequent occurrence of the number 7 in the narrative. For instance, the Lord commands Noah to take into the ark clean beasts by 7s, and fowls also by 7s, and tells him that in 7 days he will cause it to rain upon the earth. We are also told that the ark rested in the 7th month, and the 17th day of the month upon the mountains of Ararat. After sending the dove out of the ark the first time, Noah waited 7 days before sending it out again. After sending the dove out the second time, he stayed yet another 7 days, ere he again sent forth the dove. This coincidence arises from the mystic power attached to the number 7, derived from its frequent occurrence in astrology. We find that in all religions of antiquity, the number 7, which applied to the sun, moon, and the 5 planets known to the ancients, is a sacred number, represented in all kinds and sorts of forms. Footnote. Everything of importance was calculated by and fitted into this number 7 by the Aryan philosophers. Ideas as well as localities. Isis Unveiled, Volume 2, page 407. Okay, back to the main text. For instance, the candlestick with 7 branches in the temple of Jerusalem, the 7 enclosures of the temple, the 7 doors of the cave of Mithras, the 7 stories of the Tower of Babylon. Another footnote. Each one being consecrated to a planet, the first to Saturn, second to Jupiter, third to Mars, fourth to the Sun, fifth to Venus, sixth to Mercury, seventh to the Moon. The Pentateuch Examined, Volume 4, page 269. See also the Angel Messiah, page 106. The 7 gates of Thebes. Another footnote. Each of which had the name of a planet. Okay, back up to the main text. The flute of 7 pipes, generally put into the hand of the god Pan. The lyre of 7 strings, touched by Apollo. The book of fate, composed of 7 books. The 7 prophetic rings of the Brahmins. Another footnote. On each of which the name of a planet was engraved. Back to the text. The 7 stories, the 7 stones consecrated to the 7 planets in Laconia. Another footnote. There was to be seen in Laconia 7 columns erected in honor of the 7 planets. Dupius, Origin of Religious Belief, page 34. The division into 7 castles adopted by the Egyptians and Indians. 7 castes, not 7 castles. The 7 idols of the Bonzes, Bonzes. The 7 altars of the monument of Mithras. The 7 great spirits evoked by the Persians. The 7 archangels of the Chaldeans. The 7 archangels of the Jews. Footnote, the Jews believed that the throne of Jehovah was surrounded by his 7 high chiefs. Gabriel, Michael, Raphael, Uriel, and so on. Bible for Learners, Volume 3, page 46. The 7 days of the week. Footnote. Each one being consecrated to a planet, and the sun and the moon. Sunday, Dies Solis, sacred to the sun. Monday, Dies Lunae, sacred to the moon. Tuesday, sacred to Tuiso or Mars. Wednesday, sacred to Odin or Woden and to Mercury. Thursday, sacred to Thor and others. Friday, sacred to Freya and Venus. Saturday, sacred to Saturn. The ancient Egyptians assigned a day of the week to the sun, moon, and 5 planets, and the number 7 was held there in great reverence. Kenrick, Egypt, 1-38. Okay. 7 branches of the Assyrian tree of life. Agni, the Hindu god, is represented with 7 arms. Sura's horse, and Sura is the sun god of the Hindus, was represented with 7 heads. 7 churches are spoken of in the Apocalypse. Balaam builded 7 altars and offered 7 bullocks and 7 rams on each altar. Pharaoh saw 7 kine and so on in his dream. The priest of Midian had 7 daughters. Jacob served 7 years. Before Jericho, 7 priests bear 7 horns. Samson was bound with 7 green withes, and his marriage feast lasted 7 days, and so on and so on. We might continue with as much more, but enough has been shown to verify the statement that in all religions of antiquity, the number 7 is a sacred number. And allow me to add, Rome in ancient time was referred to as the city of 7 hills. And that's it for the chapter, and my voice barely made it all the way through, so I am going to call it quits and spend God knows how long editing this thing, since I have so much to cut out. I will tweet out the links to stuff that I mentioned. Actually, they've already been some of them have already been tweeted out. The Twitter account, I gave the wrong name last time because I didn't realize, I forgot that it wouldn't allow me to put on the full name. It's T Park Atheist. It's at T Park Atheist. Is the Twitter account, and I'll even tweet out the Atheist in the Trailer Park Facebook page so you can find it that way. And hopefully my voice will be back to normal next week. And, well, say goodnight, Fuzznuts. Damned cat.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.